Hey everybody, let's talk about the upcoming Sagittarius full moon, which of course began at the Gemini new moon. It's always important to understand that this is a whole cycle, meaning that when the sun and moon came together 2 weeks ago, which was a new moon, that happened in Gemini, and that is a cycle that unfolds over the course of a month. And so the full moon is always the halfway point. I want to say this again because no other person that I've heard, at least, reminds people of this fact. A full moon, whilst it can um, bring things to a head, uh, a culmination, illumination, um, an ending, it can also bring about new beginnings. No one ever talks about that. It's even logical. When something is ending, it clearly means that something new is opening up. So just remember that with full moons. It's a very important point that just gets completely overlooked. So this Sagittarius in full moon is pretty interesting. And, look, let's even just very simply put, Sagittarius, the third fire sign in the wheel. So it's the more advanced out of the three fire signs. That's how it works with the elements of the signs, right? You've got Aries, which is the birth, the infant, the baby, the absolute epitome of new beginnings. And you've got Leo, which is another phase of the fire sign, more refined, developed. And then you've got Sagittarius, which is the well, it's the bigger picture, it's the full, complete expression of fire. Sagittarius, by its very nature, is an optimistic, it's the eternal optimist, um, preacher, teacher, guru, seeker of truth, seeker of meaning, um, also seeker of fun, adventure, joy, happiness. It's ruled by Jupiter. Jupiter rules joy and Venus rules happiness. So there are a few things going on in this full moon chart, which I'll bring up and show you in a moment, which also involve Jupiter itself in relation to what Jupiter is doing with other planetary energies in the sky. And that's important because Jupiter rules the full moon, right? Jupiter rules Sagittarius. So just rewind for a moment. Of course, when we are thinking about the full moon, it's always really good to think about it from the point of view of where it is in your own birth chart. So locate Sagittarius. Now, the full moon is happening at the 20th degree of Sagittarius, and the sun, obviously, which is going to be exactly opposite, is at 20 degrees of Gemini. So the two rulers to the sun and the moon, which is the full moon, are Mercury and Jupiter. And they just synchronistically happen to be in a conjunction in Cancer during this full moon. Let me actually just bring up the chart and we can just unpack a few layers. I don't intend to stay on very long. We'll see how that goes. Every time I say that, it never happens. Anyway, so here's the full moon chart. This is for Melbourne, Australia. So never mind the position of where everything is because it will change according to your location. And ultimately, as I said, it's much more useful to observe this relative to your own birth chart. So the new moon began in Gemini with a conjunction to Mercury. And a couple of days later, Mercury was reborn as an evening star, who is said to be Hermes as per the ancient teachings. So here is Mercury here now. You can see Mercury is behind the sun, right? So if I was to animate this chart and we were just to follow the order of planets as they, travel down the lower hemisphere, the sun is going to rise before Mercury. That's what makes Mercury an evening star because it will rise after the sun. So Mercury is an evening star. It was very significant in the beginning of this cycle. So this cycle has a lot to do with knowledge, information, ideas, communications, exchange of communication ideas. And I'm going to stick to the personal way of looking at this as opposed to discussing collective trends, themes, cataclysmic events, and so forth. Sometimes I do bring in some collective things when it just feels it's important to bring a voice to certain things. But for the most part, I like to speak to these energies purely from the point of view of how we might ourselves understand this and ultimately work with it, to our best capability. So this is a lunation cycle that involves Gemini and Sagittarius. That axis, Gemini and Sagittarius, is the axis that has specifically to do with our left brain, Gemini, left brain being the linear mind as well, and being the part of our mind that basically brings all data and all information together, all of it. And Sagittarius, the opposite, is our right brain intuition, long-term memory as well, and being able to view things from a much wider perspective or scope. So we now, with this full moon being in Sagittarius and Mercury and Jupiter are in a conjunction together. Look at Jupiter, it's at 0 degrees Cancer, which I will probably come back and speak to that separately in another transmission. But just for today, just know that Jupiter has entered Cancer during this full moon. It is the ruler of the full moon. It's conjunct Mercury. Mercury and Jupiter are the rulers of this full moon. So there's a very powerful, important transmission that will come through for you relative to your circumstances that has to do with information, communications. That could be arguments, that could be exchange of ideas, that could be, in matters of law, that could be in matters of conflict, arguments, or learning, teaching, exchange of information, knowledge, and so forth, wisdom. All of that now has reached a real peak point in this cycle. So something is going to be illuminated during this cycle relative to what was seeded at the new moon, Gemini, new moon in Gemini conjunct Mercury. What was seeded at that point now is basically at a point where it shows you the full view of that. Whether you like it or whether you don't is not the point. The point is to bring in a larger perspective, Sagittarius, full moon in Sagittarius, to bring in a larger view into all the information that has been collected and that has now transpired into a perspective where you can see it very, very differently, maybe, or you can see the bigger picture. That's fundamentally what this full moon is putting the spotlight on. In addition to that, Sagittarius, just want to go back to that point about Sagittarius is generally quite a feel-good energy, it can bring about a natural sense of joy of some kind, right? It's the happy-go-lucky type of energy. So I do really like the moon in Sag, and especially a full moon in Sag. There's a lot of optimism that can come out of this. And maybe that optimism will just simply be linked to what you've been able to gather and ultimately come to understand from a much broader perspective now in terms of this particular lunation cycle, right? And the conjunction between Mercury and Jupiter in Cancer is quite important here because Jupiter is actually squaring Saturn. And this square configuration is connected to the backstory of when Jupiter and Saturn formed what was called, and what is often called, the Great Conjunction, which was in 2020, right, in Aquarius. So that was the seeding of those two planets coming together. They planted the seeds in Aquarius, which, think about what was happening in 2020. Don't need to go into it. We all know what I'm talking about, right? And what happened to the world and where everybody fell in that storyline. And this is called a first quarter square, although we've had a couple of them already, but in different signs. Now we're having the square between Jupiter and Saturn in the signs of Aries and Cancer. It's still part of that first quarter square. And this is important in this lunation cycle because Jupiter rules the full moon. And here is Jupiter at 0 degrees Cancer, squaring Saturn, right? A first quarter square, in very simple terms, is basically an image, a reflection of, let's just say, whatever you thought or believed or went along with or were a victim of or got sucked into, or maybe you had, the ability to be more objective and stand out of that narrative that was being projected in a very horrific way, right? That really, it just plays people in a straitjacket, right? It brought about this storyline that you had no choice, that, all your freedoms would be taken away if you didn't follow the narrative and so forth, which we all know is a bunch of BS, right? Now, I knew that from day one, and I know many others who knew that from day one. And I know many that did not. So this square business between Jupiter and Saturn, pardon me, at this point in time, especially during this full moon, because Jupiter rules the full moon, the first quarter square is a crisis point. It's called, Dane Rudhyar coined it, crisis in action. The crisis in action basically describes, okay, whatever was happening in 2020 that defined perhaps the decisions you made and the things you believed and the steps you took and so on and so forth. Now we are at the crisis of action point, which means whatever wasn't, whatever you did or whatever you believed, or whatever course of action you took, now you're able to see the workings of that, the happenings of that, how it's impacted your life, for instance. It might have destroyed certain things in your life. It may not have. I think it caused havoc in most people's lives, right? So this crisis in action point it's a doorway that kind of says, okay, well, you went this way, you decided this, you took that on board, and so now here's your opportunity to take some action, right, towards whatever it is you did or decided or thought or believed that has not supported your life path, that has not supported what's really authentic for you, that has not actually made your life better, right? But has taken away from you in some kind of way. This is the time to make some corrections by taking some course of action. The course of action is going to be different depending on who you are, your circumstances, and what's going on in your life. Those finer details need to be assessed on an individual basis. But on a broader spectrum, this has largely to do with what we believed and what we can now see as maybe the truth, the truth of what was and what is, right? In any case, we can't go back. We can't go back to change what's happened, but we have an opportunity here with a door opening, showing us this is a time to actually take some course of action that is more suitable to the alliance of what makes you feel more in touch with your life, your reality, and your ability to really be truly authentic with that. That's what this is showing. So even though squares are very challenging, they are also the portal that give us that push, that leg up, that ability to change something, to to take a course of action, to do something, because what we are in, we know doesn't work. It doesn't feel right. It hasn't worked out for us. So now's the time to correct that seed that began in 2020 by the course of action we're going to take, right? Now, squares, especially a first quarter square, it's challenging because first quarter squares speak to the initiation. That's the direction that we take through certain courses of action where we may experience our reality or certain aspects of our reality or certain people in our reality who might push against what you're trying to do. So that's the challenging part about it. And that's where you just simply have to be you have to be strong, you have to be courageous, and you have to stand in your truth and what you actually really believe. That is that is healthy for you, that is good for you, that works for you, right? Not what's told to you or dictated to you or expected of you. To be in touch with that part of yourself with pure conviction. And, Mars is in Leo. And actually, Mars forms a trine to the moon. And what's happening is Chiron comes into this story as well. And there's a grand trine between a grand fire trine with Chiron, Mars, and the moon, full moon. That's quite a helpful little arrangement of pattern there, right? Grand trines are an ease and a grace. They allow the energy to move in a fluid manner with no resistance. Mars is the archetype of courage. It has a lot to do with violence and aggression and conflict as well. And there are different phases of Mars, depending on whether Mars is a morning star, whether Mars is an evening star, or whether Mars is invisible. And there are different divinities associated to Mars in those three phases where Mars may be. Now, at the moment, Mars is an evening star, and the evening star corresponds to the archetype of Aries or Aries, Aries. So it's a pretty it's a very intense type of Mars energy when Mars is an evening star, and it can bring about a lot of violence and aggression. So in collective conflicts and cataclysmic events that are still going on, that's quite a dangerous Mars where Mars is at the moment as an evening star and in Leo, right? It's fueled by so much fire and you could say passion and aggression and the like, right? But I want to stay away from the collective drama and just focus it again onto our own path and how we might utilize this energy. And I think the Mars trine Chiron trine Moon is also connected to the courage that we can bring into certain situations in our life at the moment that have also been activated by the Venus-Chiron conjunction that's been in play, for the last week and a half or so. And Venus and Chiron will come together again next year. So it's not the end of the Venus-Chiron conjunction in Aries. We've got one more, hit of that, but we're so close to the end of, Venus in Aries and Chiron in Aries conjunct together, right? But we're not through it yet. So whatever's come up for you with the Venus-Chiron conjunction, and I know many of you, because I did a couple of videos where I've spoken about it, it has been quite a big deal for a lot of people. It has really triggered and activated a lot of pain for a lot of people, a lot of difficult situations, and namely in relationships, right? Because it is Venus. So perhaps certain events and things that have been transpiring even in this lunation cycles for the last couple of weeks, the Venus Chiron conjunction would have activated or triggered some real painful points in the little stories and chapters of what's going on in our life from the point of view of love and relationship and connections that we have to certain people. That can be in a myriad of different ways. It doesn't just have to be in a sexual way, because Venus corresponds to anyone we connect with. Venus and the moon are the two planets that correspond to connecting. They are the two feminine bodies that describe that element in our life where we connect with someone or something. Of course, Venus has to do with creativity as well. So, this can be collaborative projects and things that we've been involved with other people and so forth. It can bring up a lot of different things. So we've got to really keep an open mind. But what I'm saying with the Mars and the Chiron and the Moon here in this grand fire trine, I think there is something that's really helping us with Mars and Chiron and the full moon to, to push through something, not in an aggressive way, but perhaps with a bit more grace. Versus, punching someone in the face, right? You might just punch them in the face by basically liberating yourself and freeing yourself up by being really courageous to step out of something maybe that has not been right for you. And it's all going to come through the new information or the new understanding or the bigger sort of picture view that you now have over certain things you've been thinking about, certain communications that have been going on. As I said, whether they've been good or bad or negative or positive, it really doesn't matter which spectrum you're sitting on. You could be sitting on both in different chapters in your life, right? It doesn't matter where you are on that spectrum, wherever you are, there's going to be something quite huge that comes into your field of seeing and understanding right now, because Jupiter and Mercury are conjunct and they are the rulers of the full moon. And once again, I think the Grand Trine just helps us push through some kind of storyline, some kind of chapter, some kind of happenings in our life, with a greater sense of courage. And it might just enable us to do some healing work as well, because Chiron is always about healing, but it's always about the painful shit that we've got to face, that we either ignore, avoid, disassociate from, numb down, and so forth. Ignore, project, whatever the case, right? This is grand trines are an ease of grace, of fluid energy, supporting something for us in our life, basically. So those are the main themes with this full moon. Let me just see. As I said, I would like to come back and speak to Jupiter in Cancer, because that's going to be a journey of the next 12 months. Jupiter in Cancer, which is its exalted position, meaning it's a position where Jupiter is very comfortable, very happy, exalted. Think about the word exalted. It provides and produces a lot of support, especially in like Jupiter in Cancer is such a supportive energy. So I think, from a collective sort of field, it's going to bring in some really good things on that level for people, which I think everyone needs, actually, because of the shape of the world and because of the destruction and cataclysmic nature of so much that's going on still, in different places. Something about Jupiter in Cancer is going to bring a grace of support, a grace of security, a grace of care in some kind of way, and that can be obviously through family dynamics. Things can become a little bit better there, if there's been family situations that have been difficult. Anyway, I'm going into Jupiter in Cancer, and I said I wouldn't, so I'm going to just stop there. But Just one other thing to point out, though, about the Mercury-Jupiter conjunction, which are the rulers to the full moon. Cancer, even though Jupiter's exalted in Cancer and Jupiter and Mercury are conjunct, and they're the two planets that connect to left brain, right brain, so our linear mind and our intuition and imagination. Cancer is quite a subjective sign. Mercury in Cancer can be very subjective. And there can be a strong, emotional content in the thinking process that's going on here as well. So even though Sagittarius views and understands the bigger picture and seeks to expand everything that it's looking at through a more hopeful lens, a more optimistic lens, the Mercury in Cancer can sort of pull things in a bit, because Cancer is a very personal sign and very subjective. It lacks objectivity. The more positive attributes of Mercury in Cancer is its richness in imagination. But Cancer is a sign that has tremendous insecurity. It is conjunct Jupiter here, though, so that helps this Mercury a lot, especially because Jupiter is exalted in Cancer. So the advantages are going to come from the Jupiter in Cancer, not the Mercury in Cancer. So I guess the point I'm trying to make there is all the things that have been going on the last couple of weeks, especially because we're just talking about this lunation cycle, the information and conversations that have happened and things that have transpired, good, ugly, or indifferent, whatever it is, or beautiful, or whatever. I just lost my main point there. Let me just think. Oh, yeah, that's right. The Mercury in Cancer has, as I said, it's quite subjective. So it might bring in a bit of a personal, emotional, touchy side to what's showing up now as well. There's some sort of emotional, subjective connection to the material that's coming up. So that's a little bit tricky, but Jupiter's going to help it. That's basically the bottom line. Jupiter is going to help it to see the bigger picture, right? And finally, I thought this was interesting. Now, look, for some people, this may not mean anything, and for others, it might mean a lot of things, but I couldn't help it but to bring it up. There's an asteroid called Pan, and the reason I bring it up is because so Mars, the planet Mars, it has its heliacal phases correspond to the morning star, evening star, or Mars being invisible, right? Which is the same principle with Mercury, Venus, Jupiter, Saturn, right? They all have these heliacal phases, which basically mean when does Mars become an evening star? When does Mars become a morning star? When is Mars invisible? And likewise with the subsequent planets. So each of these phases for every planet have a correspondence to different archetypal divinities. And so Mars, one of the divinities that connects to Mars when Mars is invisible is the god Pan, Pan. And I don't know how many of you know about the god Pan, but he's basically a party animal. He's the god of the ultimate sexual pleasure. So when Mars is invisible, which it's not right now, when it's invisible in the sky, it holds that vibration of Pan. So, it can go a bit wild, not a bit, a lot, pretty crazy. So, although that's not happening with Mars at the moment, the asteroid Pan is actually conjunct the sun in this full moon. So, yeah, there's a strong sexual energy is what I'm getting at, connecting to this full moon as well. because Pan is conjunct the sun. And it's in Gemini, so there could be there could be some dodgy things going on in certain relationships and certain couples where there's some lies going on, there's some deception and lies going on, and the story behind it is very much connected to the sexual intentions and desires of specific individuals. But there's definitely something dodgy going on, and there's definitely a strong sexual pull and motivation behind it. So, look, that may be significant for some, and for others, it may not. I just found it very interesting that Pan is right there with his full moon. And, look, it's sextile Mars as well. Mars is in Leo, which is a very passionate sign. And Mars is the planet of sexual organs, sexual desire, sexual energy. So, there's a strong Mars Pan energy connecting to this full moon as well. And so for some people, that might be significant. Okay, so that's it. I guess in summary, don't forget the Jupiter Saturn square. This might be where people finally address or come to terms with or confront certain things that they've been, you know, sort of going, no, that's actually what happened. This is the truth. That's how it happened. That storyline is true, or, blah, 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 holding a conviction to something that actually has not served you at all. This is the first quarter square between Jupiter and Saturn in cardinal signs, mind you. 0 degrees Cancer, a well degree. Saturn was at 0 Aries just recently. Now it's at 1 of Aries, so still very close to 0. And cardinal energy is the energy out of all the qualities that specifically corresponds to bulls, leadership, and it's that energy that has the ultimate courage to throw things off and just basically break through and start fresh. That's what it does. It has the absolute amplification and fuel and energy to throw things off and just start and push everything else out the way. I don't mean that in a negative way. I don't mean, go trailblazing over someone's house or something. I'm just talking about our own inner construct of what we have constructed internally about our reality, since 2020 when Jupiter and Saturn were conjunct in Aquarius. This is the first quarter square, or one of them. That is, it's brought things to the absolute climax of what can actually still continue and what absolutely cannot. And so that's going to be different for all of us, isn't it? So I'll leave it there, and I'll see you guys soon for more. I think I want to come back and speak to Jupiter in Cancer, which is it's a pretty good 12-month period, just with Jupiter in Cancer, although there are lots of other things going on that, are challenging and so forth. Jupiter in Cancer is because it's the exalted position, it's something that is going to act as a protective protective spirit guide, protective father, protective grandfather, protective teacher. Something or someone can protect us, when Jupiter is in Cancer. There's a lot to say about it, and I'll come back to speak to that soon. So yeah, I want to say, this time I want to say it, happy full moon. I can say it because a full moon in Sag can be very joyous, very happy, even though there might be so many, other things going on. We can always find a moment or identify something, no matter how difficult our circumstances are. There may be some exceptions, but overall, generally, everyone has difficult shit going on. There's no one that doesn't. So what I'm saying is that in amongst all of that, with a full moon in Sag and its ruler, Jupiter in Cancer in its exalted position, there's something really joyful about that particular portal and window. So just enjoy that moment, even if it's just for that day or if it's, for a week after that, whatever it is, it's important to always um, to be able to see the good things as well and not just focus on the troubled, difficult, painful shit things, right? Because everyone's got them. But there are moments that are just fucking happy moments. Sorry about the F word. All right, I'll see you guys soon.